My presentation, utilizing a text set through a coaching model, describes the process of creating and implementing a text set in a kindergarten classroom. The participating teacher in our room was Mrs. Mentz. She is a kindergarten teacher. She holds a Bachelor of Education. She's been teaching for 11 years. The majority of those years have been spent in kindergarten, and she teaches at NB Galloway School. The student population in the classroom that we worked with had 18 students. Three of those students had IEPs. There were no ELL students. One student had a significant behaviors requiring intervention, and there were four Tier 2 students. There was a large range of reading ability in the classroom. Some students still reading at a level A, creeping into B, and other students above grade level reading at a level H. The content area we chose was science. The topic was animals. It was the beginning of a science unit. The objective was to have students be able to answer the essential questions. How are some animals alike and how are they different? And where do animals live? This was a beginning of several weeks of study in which students will kind of learn to observe and describe patterns of animals, their habitats, and what they need to survive. The original text that we used for this was called A Pup and a Cub. It was actually from the Wonders reading series. It's not uncommon to have a lot of crossover between reading and science. A lot of times we use reading and science books interchangeably. There were some strengths to this text. There were large photographs, simple language, and sentence structure. The content allowed for students to practice comparing and contrasting animals using that skill. There were also some weaknesses. This text had limited text features. There were beautiful photographs, but not much more. There weren't captions, maps. There wasn't a table or anything more in depth. There was a limited content vocabulary. Other than pup and cub, there was not much of the science vocabulary we will be learning. And there was a limited scope of information and really depth, focusing on, like I mentioned, habitats. Uh, the text language form for this text is included here. You can see that there was a simple structure. In order for students to read it successfully, they needed to have some decoding skills, and that's mentioned here as well. It wasn't informational text. There were photographs. It was able to describe those animals like we mentioned before. There were a couple of strategies that we thought would help students interact with this text specifically. And as you'll see, other texts throughout the text set. Those include reading visual displays, again, using those photographs as visual cues to add more meaning to what we read. Word building, having those decoding skills in order to interact with the text, and vocabulary. This was an opportunity to really introduce some possible unknown words and work through those meanings. The books in the set were carefully chosen to encourage active learning for all students, really trying to think, what can those beginning readers read? What about those students she has that are above grade level? And fill in any identified learning gaps from that original book. The texts that were chosen are Bear Snores On, Animal Homes, Two Cubs, Two Kinds of Bears, and I Can Fly. Um, Additional materials that were brought in included National Geographic posters and visuals. Also, the National Geographic Kids website, which allows kids to just explore different animals in a age appropriate way. The first book, Two Cubs, was again at a level A. You can see here the structure used in simple sentences. The language was literal and clear. They did need to know the sight words the and have. They also needed to have a basic understanding of the animal body parts and vocabulary, including paws, tails, and fur. Um, there was not extensive background knowledge that was required, um, and the meaning was very clear. It was to identify common body parts of two animals. Some reader and task consideration. Struggling readers could have faced challenges when reading this if they were unable to recognize some basic word patterns. CVC, for example, pattern in the word cub. To successfully interact with the text, they needed to know basic background about body parts, some vocabulary that was identified. Paws, tails, and fur may give them a little bit of difficulty. So here you can see a suggestion for introducing that vocabulary. The full page color photographs were very age appropriate, engaging, really helped suck the students into the book. A suggestion here is the teacher may heighten the anticipation of reading by engaging students to preview the illustrations, share any background knowledge they have, and make predictions. So really engaging them in that conversation. This was included into the text set to really address how can we get some of these lower readers reading independently and really gaining information from what they're reading to help meet our science standard. I Can Fly was the next text. Again, simple pattern language. There were bold sentences, large illustrations. Students who didn't have the necessary decoding skills did have those picture cues to help them make those beginning sounds and solve unknown words. The language was clear and simple. Sight words included said and vocabulary, ladybug, bee, bug, and butterfly could be discussed before reading. There was not extensive knowledge that needed to happen. Reading about animals that can fly is a subject matter that's common or familiar to most readers. There was no reference to other texts or ideas. There's one level of meaning in this fantasy. The baby bird thinks he can fly, but the other animals tell him no, he can't until he does. So the theme is clear and consistent throughout the text. Students again, may face some challenges with the decoding, may be necessary to support that. Also, some vocabulary instruction. Using the pictures really helps to gain meaning from those sentences. Suggested here is a picture walk to make predictions about the story and a short discussion about animals that can fly. Here too, the teacher may heighten the anticipation of reading by inviting students to preview the illustrations, share any background knowledge they have about animals that can fly, and demonstrate reading with expression, really putting themselves in the story. And how do you think that character would tell the bird, he can't fly? No, you can't. This book was included in the set as a way to really support on-level readers to read independently with support. Below level readers could read this independently, and then certainly the advanced readers could use the visuals and do some of that comprehension very easily. This would be not a difficult book for them. Two Kinds of Bears was another text in this book. The structure is clearly comparing black bears and panda bears. It's mostly literal. There is some vocabulary that is possibly unfamiliar for students. These words include bamboo, bark, North America, and China. This is a clear comparison text. Students really need to understand what alike and different mean when they're reading this book. It doesn't assume that they have a lot of background knowledge. There's a lot of information, but it's clearly presented. There's one level of meaning, and that is to identify the similarities and differences of the text. Readers may face challenges